Joining us and sharing words of Torah with us. The Rosh Yeshiva famously says on the pasuk "V'samachta b'chol hatov," that tov is a reference to Torah. And the Rosh Yeshiva says if people would understand how sweet Torah is, how beautiful and enjoyable Torah is, they would abandon everything else in the world. They would just be running after Torah. There's a medrash. Medrash says in Shiur Rabbah that Ma'aseh Shahaya, that Ben Azai was sitting giving a shiur, Yoshek and Doresh, and there was fire all around him. So they came and told Rabbi Akiva, Ben Azai is being Doresh, and there's fire all around him. So Rabbi Akiva came to Ben Azai and said, what were you involved in? Was it Ma'aser Merkava? Was it the secrets of Torah? And he said no. I was Yoshev v'Dorish v'Choreis v'Divrei Torah. I was interweaving Divrei Torah. V'Torah b'Neviim v'Neviim v'Ksuvim. I was weaving all the different parts of Torah together, and it was so beautiful. It was smechim k'nisinasam yisina. It was arevim. It was sweet. And just like at Sinai, there was fire. So there was fire. So Rosh Yeshiva is someone who gives shiurim, and he's able to weave together all the different aspects of Torah, different sugyas. Everything is all put together, organized. It fits together beautifully. It's like a puzzle. And many people have had the experience. Certainly I have had the experience many times as a Talmid of Sachs for a number of years, of having that experience of smechim, of arevim, Divrei Torah, when everything fits together so beautifully. You see everything coming together. Smechim k'nisinasam b'sinai. So this is a beautiful opportunity for us to hear Torah from Rabbi Sachs. We're very grateful that he's joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Siva. It's a pleasure to be here. You walk in the Beis Medrash and you see Talmidim that are learning so beautifully, and it warms my heart. And Baruch Hashem, you should have continued siyata d'shmaya to grow in the Torah Hashem and avas Torah in Yiras Shamayim. I was told that you're learning Maseches Kedushin, that you started with Av Chavtes. So let me begin elsewhere, and we'll segue very, very soon to some of the sugyas that you're learning. I was told the sugyas of Mila, the sugyas of Kibbut Avayim, something somewhat familiar with? Okay, so let's start with the Mishnah in Chulin Daf Kuf Amud Beis that deals with Isra of Gira Nosha. There is machlokas Rabbi Yonason Chachamim whether this Isra of Gira Nosha, that you're not allowed to eat that sciatic nerve in the area of the thigh, applies only to a behemoth tahora or even to a behemoth tamei. Rabbi Yehuda says it applies to both types of animals. The Chachamim disagree, it only applies to a behemoth tahora. Why is it that Rabbi Yehuda says it applies to all animals? After all, the Chachamim say, look, if a behemoth tamei is off limits, and you're not allowed to eat the animal at all, why is there a need to have a separate Isra of the Gira Nosha? So therefore, the Chachamim say an animal that you're allowed to partake of, a behemoth tahora, then the Gira Nosha is off limits. But why would that Isra apply to a behemoth tamei? So Rabbi Yehuda says, I'll tell you a convincing proof. Where is this Isra of Gira Nosha found? In Parshas Vayishlach. When it was given in Parshas Vayishlach, isn't it clear it applied to all of those animals? Whether it's a behemoth tamei, whether it's a behemoth tahora? Obviously yes. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda says very simply, what was, is. What was true then in Parshas Vayishlach is true now, and therefore this applies even to a behemoth tamei as well. How can the Chacham disagree? Isn't that clear that in Parshas Vayishlach it applied universally? So you know what the Chachamim answer? Misinai nemra ela shenichta bimkom. Misinai nemra, ela shenichta bimkom. What exactly does that mean? That Torah was given to us at Har Sinai, although it's written there. The Rambam in that Mishnah, Pirush Mishnah Yisrael and Davkov, writes the following. The Rambam tells us, brace ourselves, v'sim libcha, ela ikar hagadol hanichva b'mishnah hazaz. I want you to pay special attention to the overarching principle that is embedded in this Mishnah. And you know what that principle is? Taryag mitzvos nemro l'moshe misim. Why is it that we observe the mitzvahs Hashem? Not because of Chumash Bereshis, but because of Matan Har Sinai. And therefore, the Chanim say, I admit that in Parshas Vayishlach, when this Torah Giran was given, it applied to both classes of animals, Behema Tahora, Behema Tameya, but we don't observe Giran because of Parshas Vayishlach. We observe Giran because it was given to us at Matan Har Sinai. And now things changed. Even though that at that point in time, it applied to both animals, but Matan Har Sinai and beyond, it only applies to a Behema Tahor. So the Rambam writes, that's the Klal Gadol, that's the Ikar HaGadol. Taryag mitzvos nemon l'moshe misina. And the Rambam writes, I'll give you another example, now a little closer to home. No, Bris Milah. Why is it that we observe the mitzvah of Bris Milah? The Rambam writes, not because of Parshas Lech Lecha, not because of Parshas Vayera, but rather because of Parshas Tazria. It was given to Avram Avinu. That certainly is true. But we observe the mitzvah of Bris Milah because it was given to us in Parshas Tazria. Just like Giran is because of Matan Har Sinai, the mitzvah of Bris Milah is because of Matan Har Sinai. Well, that's what the Rambam writes. It's something which is stunning. Not because of the tzivui that was given to Avram Avinu. You know, there is a Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Lamed Hey, where the Gemara discusses the following. Let's assume a child is born, not naturally, but a child is born through a C-section. When exactly do you do the bris? On day 8 or on day 1? On day 1. Why would you think that the bris is done on day 1? Because Rav Asi says very simply the following. In Parshas Tazria, the Torah tells us, Isha ki Tazria v'yolda zachar, a woman who gives birth naturally, followed by days of Tumah, then days of Tahara, and then uviyom hashmini yima basar loso. When day 8, only when it's a natural labor. So Rav Asi says, kol she'imo temeya leda nima lishmona. If it's a natural birth, then day 8. Otherwise, day 1. The Gemara says, how can that be? Doros harishonim yochichu. When you look in Sefer Bereshis, now yesterday's Kriyas HaTorah, the Bris Milah of Yitzchak was done on day 8. That had nothing at all to do with days of Tumah and days of Torah. You know what the Gemara answers? Nitnu Torah v'nischadshu halachot. It's true. The day 8 before Matan Torah had nothing at all to do with Tumah and Torah. But you know what? We observe, as the Rambam writes, the mitzvah of Bris Milah based on Matan Har Sinai. Based on Matan Har Sinai. Is it really true that there's nothing that you can glean from the Bris Milah of Avram Avinu? How do we know that a mother is exempt from performing the Bris Milah of her son? What did you see on Daf? Chavtes Amud Aleph? A pasuk? No? Right? Osov regarding Avram Avinu. Interesting, no? The Gemara does indeed derive that that's true, that a mother is exempt from the milah of her son. You know what the Rambam writes? The Rambam couches already. That to some extent, we were told on Har Sinai to perform the Bris Milah in the same way and in the same fashion that Avram Avinu did so. So sometimes it is true, but realize that's remarkable, that the Gemara will learn certain Dinei Milah even from Avram Avinu. But the Rambam is clear, it doesn't mean that is why we're doing the Bris Milah. It's because Moshe Rabbeinu told us in Har Sinai, I want you to continue the Bris Milah in that fashion, unless there are differences. You know, I don't know if you saw, there's a Sagini Vamos, Ayin Aleph from the days where the Gemara is clear that the Bris Milah of Avram Avinu was done differently than the way we do Bris Milah. Bris Milah requires removal of the outer layer, the Or Hamila, removal, rolling back of the inner layer, the Or HaPriya. Avram Avinu was only obligated in Milah and Apriya. Milah and Apriya. That was certainly is not true of us. Our bris milah contains milah priya, and the Mishnah tells us mov lo para ki ilu lo mal, that would not be a milah kshera if one were to do it exactly as the tzivui of Avram Avinu. That is not the basis of our chiyuv, but there are similarities, and that indeed is sufficient. And that's how the Gemara can be dorish oso v'lo osa. Not so simple, because maybe I could argue as follows. You're asking me if a mother can do a bris milah? Can a woman be a mol? Can a woman perform a milah kshera? If a woman can perform a milah kshera, so now I'll ask the question, so is a mother obligated in the milah for son? But if you're going to tell me a woman cannot perform a milah kshera, is it so obvious that I require a pasuk? You know what's difficult with this? Because another sugya, Avodah Daf Chav Zayin, that this is machlokas Rabbi and Rabbi Yonason, whether a woman can even do a milah kshera. It's 2 days in Tosos how we assume the halacha. When was the last time we went to a bris and a woman was the moel? Or machmer for the Shita of Rav that a woman cannot do a bris milah. It's striking that if a woman cannot do a bris milah, I need a pasuk to say a woman is exempt from that which she cannot do. But take a look. That's Tosos' discussion. And for the Zar Daf Chav Zayin, there Tosos writes the following: even if a woman be obligated, it doesn't mean she does the bris. It means that she has to see to it that the child is mohol. Ooh, that's a Tosos. But a Zar Daf Chav Zayin, she would have to engage someone else to perform the bris milah. Well, so maybe I would argue, good, the mother is obligated to engage someone else. That's a very fascinating model, not for today's shiur, that a person can be obligated in a mitzvah that they cannot perform, and they have to engage someone else to do it. It sounds a little novel, a little bit unusual. That's the theme of a Shagasari in Siman Vav, whether indeed you can be obligated in a mitzvah that you know what you can't do, but you have to see to it that it's fulfilled through others. Al Yedei Acherim. It's a fascinating model. But getting back to our Rambam writes, Giranash, Bris Milah. Those are classic examples of mitzvot that we do not derive from Sefer Bereshis, but rather Taryag mitzvot Nevna Moshe Misina. You know, there is Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi is a Moed Katan, Perek Gimel Halacha Hey, where the Yerushalmi discusses Avelus. Is Avelus min HaTorah? Is Avelus D'Rabbanan? And even if you assume that the Dini Avelus, some of which are min HaTorah, that is only, the Rambam writes, one day. And only if the Petira, the Misa, and the Kfura was on a single day. You know what the Yerushalmi asks? Shouldn't I assume that the entire week of Shiva is min HaTorah? After all, doesn't the Torah tell us in Parshas Vayechi, when Yaakov Avinu is niftar, Vayas, La'aviv Eival Shivas Yamim, that there were 7 days of Avelus after Yaakov Avinu was niftar? So you know what our Girson Yerushalmi is? That no, you can't derive that from Yaakov Avinu, because Ein Lameidim Mikoda Matan Torah. You can't derive that from Sefer Bereshis. If you want to know the Dini Avelus, you have to look at Maman Har Sinai. And Maman Har Sinai, you don't find a week of Avelus. Maybe you find a day of Avelus in Parsha Shmini, perhaps. Machlokas Rambam and Tosos, but you don't have a week. You don't have a week of Avelus. So if I were to stop the shiur now, you would tell me, okay, the takeaway of the shiur is Taryag mitzvos Moshe Misina. We don't derive any klolei hamitzvos from Sefer Bereshis, from before Maman Har Sinai, and that's it. And the Rai is Giranash, Bris Milah, Avelus. You know what the difficulty is? When you kind of tour Shas, there's so many dinim that we derive from before Matan Torah. And there the Gemara doesn't object that Ein Lameidim Mikoda Matan Torah. When you look in yesterday's Kriyas Torah, the Torah describes the zrizus, the alacrity of Avram Avinu, performing mitzvos at the first opportune moment. You know what that's called? Zrizim Makdimim L'Mitzvos. Zrizim Makdimim L'Mitzvos. There is a Tosos in Shabbos and Daf Kuf Lamed, where Tosos writes, in the context of Bris Milah, that Zrizim Makdimim L'Mitzvos is min HaTorah. It's min HaTorah. Zrizim Makdimim L'Mitzvos. You have an opportunity to perform mitzvah right now, do so with haste, with passion, with enthusiasm. Zrizim Makdimim L'Mitzvos. Where do you see that this is true? The Gemara quotes the pasuk regarding Avram Avinu. Vayashkem Avram baboker. Mentioned more than once in yesterday's Kriyas HaTorah. In fact, there are two Girsos in the Gemara, Pesachim Daf Daled, Yom Daf Chavches. Which Vayashkem Avram baboker is it? Is it Akedah? Vayashkem Avram baboker? Or maybe it's Avram Avinu regarding stone? Vayashkem Avram baboker l'makom amad sham regarding stone. Fascinating. Machlokas Rishona, which one? Akedah is the mitzvah of Akedah, and what was the mitzvah of stone? I would just, that's Tosfos discussion. You know what I would add? Ooh, the Ram Brachos derives from that. V'yashkem Avram Boker, Tefillah. Avram Avinu is Palo Shachris. V'yashkem Avram Boker. Even though Avram Avinu is not obligated to do so, but Avram Avinu dav and bizrizus, and that's V'yashkem Avram Boker. That Tosfos writes is Min HaTorah. And I would raise the same question, that isn't that Sefer Bereshis, isn't that Kota Matan Torah? I don't know if you've discussed the concept of Hidur Mitzvah. Hidur Mitzvah. You're obligated to perform mitzvahs in a beautiful way. That's a Sugya Shabbos Tafkuf Lamed Gimel. And you know what the source of that is? A pasuk that you say every day in davening. Zeg Keli Vanveyu. Zeg Keli Vanveyu. Isna lefanav b'mitzvahs. Beautify yourself in the performance of mitzvahs. See to it that the object of the mitzvah is something that has a sense of beauty, a sense of splendor. Lulavna, shukana, shofarna. And certainly make sure that the Osa mitzvah has a certain sense of beauty and splendor as well. It's not enough to have a beautiful lulav. You have to make sure that it's a shidduch. Know that the noto also is hisnala fun of the mitzvahs. How do you know that that's true? The Gemara bases it on the pasuk of Zakeli Vanveyu. That pasuk is before Matan Torah, and I would even go a step further. That pasuk was not a tzivui at all. That pasuk was part of Az Yasir, Shiur Sayam, and from that we derive Hidur Mitzvah. And I'll tell you the following: the Ravid Shita is that Hidur Mitzvah is a din daraisa. That's a din daraisa. Hidur Mitzvah is min haTorah. Hidur Mitzvah is min haTorah. Where is this Ravid? Sukkot Daf Yud. The Ravid is explicit that Hidur Mitzvah is min haTorah. We're deriving this din of Hidur Mitzvah, min haTorah, from Shiur Sayam. Is it so obvious that indeed that's true? Have you ever heard of a concept of Havchana? Havchana? Sigin Yevamos and Daf Mendes. Let's assume Rahman Litzlan, a woman loses her husband. She's not allowed to marry right away. Because if she marries right away and soon after has a child, you know what? We're not going to know whether the father is the Baal Rishon or the Baal Sheni. So you have to have a waiting period in order to make it clear, yes, that this child is from the first husband, this child is from the second husband. I understand, it makes sense that that should be true, but is there a pasuk? Is there a pasuk that teaches me this concept of Havchana? You know, the Gemara writes in Yevamos Mendes, Avram Avinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avram Avinu, V'yos l'cha Elokim l'zarach ha'acharecha. You have to preserve your zera, your lineage. You have to know who is the father. You have to know who is the mother. What happened to the principle of Ein Lamedini Kodem Matan Torah? Havchana is based on Avram Avinu. You know the principle of Ein Marvin Simcha B'Simcha? Kadosh Baruch Hu gives you reason to rejoice, to celebrate. You know what? Celebrate each simcha to its fullest. Don't try to combine smachot. How do you know that that's true? Yerushalmi writes Ma'akan Perkala from Yaakov Avinu, Leah, Rachel. You married Leah, Malei Shavuazos. Fulfill the Simchas Nisuin before you move on to marry Rachel. You know, the list can go on and on and on. The Gemara Bava Basra Kufayin Gimel discusses Arvos. You know how we know the principle of Arvos? The Gemara writes Yehuda, taking responsibility for Binyamin. Yehuda redeemed himself. He didn't fully take responsibility for Yosef, but he stepped up and took responsibility for Binyamin. The Gemara says, Mikan Sha'arev Nishtabe. So I'll throw out the simple question. When do you say L'meidimi Kol Matan Torah, and when do you say Ein L'meidimi Kol Matan Torah? When do we say that no, Har Sinai? When do I assume no? Even before Har Sinai. The beginning of Shmos and Sefer Bereshis, yeah, that of course is a great basis. the great basis of limud. So let me start with the following, because I think this is one of the most important principles in Avodas Hashem. There is a Gemara Bava Metzia on Daf Lamed Beis that discusses Tsar Balei Chayim. You're not allowed to mistreat, you can't abuse an animal. And the Gemara says, Tsar Balei Chayim Daraisa. Tsar Balei Chayim is min haTorah. Tsar Balei Chayim is min haTorah. So I'm going to press you. Where do you see Tsar Balei Chayim? What do you mean? Tsar Balei Chayim is min haTorah. Where is that found? Where is that found? Yep. Bilam. That's interesting. No? Bilam's a possibility, you know? You know who writes that? The Rambam writes that in Marnevuchim, and that's explicit in Sefer Chassidim. Bilam. If Bilam is criticized, Amal HaKisa, why are you hitting the donkey? Oh, okay, so Tsar Balei Chayim is Daraisa. Oh, that's what the Rambam writes. Where else do you see that Tsar Balei Chayim is Daraisa? Good, that...
With the camel, when she's in the water.
Right, that you have to take care of the need of. That's true, that you see she went out of her way in order to make sure that the animals have to drink. That wasn't simply pragmatic, because it wouldn't be appropriate to have animals just sit there and work and not. And where else do you see where an animal cannot work and you can't allow an animal to graze? What's that called? Is there an Isser in the Torah?
Shorbedisha.
Right, Losachsam Shorbedisha. Good, no, that's called an Isser Chasima. No? The Torah tells us Losachsam Shorbedisha. An animal is plowing. It really is not right to muzzle the animal. If the animal cannot have the necessary food or drink that otherwise it's entitled to. You know, writes that? Ooh, that's a Shita Mekubetzes, but Matzidaf Lamed Beis the Ravid. Losachsam Shorbedisha is the source of Tsar Balei Chayim. What happens if you see an animal that's suffering under its load?
To lift it.
What's that called? Frika, Te'ina. If an animal is suffering under its load, you have to relieve an animal of its burden. A mitzvah sprika. You know what Rashi writes? Shabbos Kuf Koches? That's the source of Tsar Balei Chayim. That's the source of Tsar Balei Chayim. Okay? So there are other examples also. Let's stick even with what we have. You see from Frika, Chasima, Bilam, Ba'avos, Imahos, that it's appropriate to concern yourself with the well-being, with the betterment of an animal. And it's really inappropriate to mistreat and to abuse an animal. But daraisa. What exactly does that mean? You look in the Rambam Sefer Mitzvot. There's a mitzvah of Tsar Balei Chayim. One of the Taryag mitzvahs is Tsar Balei Chayim. Guess what? No. So what exactly does that mean? It's really not a mitzvah, but it's min haTorah. It's not one of the Taryag mitzvahs. So this, I think, is one of the most important fundamental yesodos in Avodas Hashem. And that's just simply what the Radvaz points out. This is a Tshuvas Radvaz in a section called the Shana Sarambam Kuf Samaches, where the Radvaz writes, Tsar Balei Chayim is not a mitzvah saseh. Tsar Balei Chayim is not an Isser lo saseh, but it's min haTorah. It's min haTorah. You think the Torah is limited to Taryag mitzvos? Taryag mitzvos is the starting gate. But Taryag mitzvos is not the finish line. Not the finish line. You begin with Taryag mitzvos, but you don't end with Taryag mitzvos. Obviously, that if something is contained within the Taryag mitzvos, that's something that's critical. But you know what? It doesn't have to be one of the clear mitzvos of the Torah. If it's obvious, it's evident from what the Torah tells us that this is appropriate, that's a din d'oraisa. And if it's clear from the Torah that this is inappropriate, that's an issa d'oraisa. It doesn't have to be a mitzvah. It doesn't have to be a mitzvah. Wow, that already sounds so stunning. That aside from the mitzvah Torah, there's something else. There's something else that is binding min haTorah, even though it's not one of the Torah Giants. Even though it's not one of the Torah Giants. What is this called exactly? And where does this come from? That there is this concept. This is a Hagdara min HaTorah. If a person abuses an animal, you're going to tell him what you're doing is min HaTorah. Sar Balei Chaim Daraisa. And he's going to tell you, but I looked in the Rambam Sefer Mitzvot, there's no mitzvah of Tzar Balei Chaim. You're going to tell me, yeah, but the Rav Asa doesn't have to be a mitzvah. It doesn't have to be a mitzvah. What exactly is this Torah? So I'll tell you two words that the Chazon Ish uses. This, even if you don't look up everything that I said, this I want you to look up. So take a look at the Chazon Ish in your Ideya. Kuf Mem Tes Ches. Simin Kuf Mem Tes Os Ches. Okay, that's required reading. Good? That Chazon Ish. Kuf Mem Tes Ches. After you see that, you can take a look at another Chazon Ish. And that's from Ibn Ezer. Kuf Chav Tes Yud Gimel. Kuf Chav Tes Yud Gimel. Let's see the first one first. The Chazon Ish uses two words. We'll have to explain what it means and where it comes from. But the Chazon Ish writes that aside from the technical mitzvahs HaTorah, there's something which is called Ratzon HaTorah. Ratzon HaTorah. This is what the Torah desires. This is the will of Hashem. And if I can demonstrate to you that this is the will of Hashem, that this is what you must do, or this is what you may not do, that is a din darais. That is a din darais. That's not just a midas chasidus. That's just not like, lifnei mishuras hadin. That's not, if you want to be frum, this is what you have to do. No, that's a din darais. Binding part of the din darais of Ratzon HaTorah. Wow. And you know what the Chazon Ish bases this on? Right? The comment of Vilna Gaon in Yeridea Reish Mem. What's Reish Mem? Kivud Aveim. Based on the Rosh Yeshiva. Chazon Ish writes this is clear from what the Rashba writes about the mitzvah of Kivud Aveim. What's the raya from Kivud Aveim? The Rashba is bothered by this. There is a Gemara Yevamos Davav that tells us something frightening. A parent tells you to be Mechal Shabbos. A parent tells the son who is a Kohen to go take a stroll in the Beis HaKvaros. Wow. A parent is telling you to do something that is absolutely against the mitzvah Satan. The Gemara Yevamos Davav, surprising, Yachal Yishmalan. Maybe you would think you should listen to the parent. After all, I'm not allowed to, but the parent says, I should. And therefore a clash between Kivud Aveim and the mitzvah Sator. Wow, Yachal Yishmalan. Maybe you would think, yes, you're obligated to do so. No, the Gemara quotes a pasuk. Achesh Shavsosei Tishmaru means Kulchem Chayavim B'Chodi. The Torah tells us, yes, Kavod Savich V'Asimecha, but there's a caveat, but not at the expense of Shabbos. Kulchem Chayavim B'Chodi. So if a parent says, Be Machal Shabbos, Be Machal Shabbos, bets are off. You don't listen to the parent. So the Rosh was bothered by the problem. A parent says, Be Machal Shabbos. Since when is that Kivud Aveim? How far did you get so far? The last line on Daf, Lamed Aleph from the base? Yeah? Cool. The Gemara says, what exactly is Kivud Aveim? What does the Gemara answer? What is Kivud Aveim? What are the, Gemara says 6 things. Now what is Kivud Aveim? Tell me. Lamed Aleph from the base?
Feed and drink.
Oh, right. Feeding and drinking. Machal mashke.
Dress them.
Okay. Malbish mechase. Machnis motzi. Ooh. That's Kivud Aveim. Kivud Aveim means providing certain vital, necessary services to your parent. Your parent is hungry, provide food. Your parent is thirsty, is parched, provide a drink. Clothing, clothe your father. Take your father out. Bring your father in. No, isn't that kibbud av v'em? Isn't what you learn? And what, there's a seventh? And be mechal Shabbos? That's kibbud av v'em. And there's an eighth. If you're a Kohen, be metame yourself. The Rosh writes, that's kibbud av v'em. When I learned Kedushin on Aleph Beis, the Gemara says, kibbud av v'em is very, very specific. Very specific. Providing certain vital services. And maybe you don't even have to pay for that, but providing certain services. That's the top of the next Talmud, Mishomi. Since when is this kibbud av v'em? That's the Rosh Yeshiva Hesder. Did you ever think about that? No? You know that Gemara Yevamos now? Parent says do something wrong, you listen to them? No? Why is that kibbud av v'em at all? You need a pasuk. Oh, so the Rosh writes the following. That really is not the case in Yevamos Tavav. A parent says, be mechal Shabbos. The case is different. A parent says, I'm starving. A parent says, I'm starving. A parent says, I'm exceedingly thirsty. And I look around, and the only way I can access the food is through Chilul Shabbos. The only way I can access the drink is by walking through the Beis HaKvaros. It can't be a case where a parent says, be machal Shabbos. It's where a parent says, machil, mashke, kedushin, daf lamed aleph. This is what I need, and that's kibbud av v'em. And the only way I can provide that service is by doing something that's wrong. Oh, so maybe I should assume, maybe I should guess that, you know what, sometimes there's an override. Yachal yishmalo. No, that's the pasuk, Achesh Shavsosei Tishmar, that teaches us, Kol Chamchem V'chol. So far so good? Now the next line in the Rashba, critical. Because you can't interpret the Gemara so literally that the parent really said, be machal Shabbos, or the parent really said, go be metame yourself. Because if the parent said, be machal Shabbos, or the parent said, be metame yourself, that is not. How do you finish the sentence? That's not kibbud av v'em. That's not what the Rosh writes. Ooh, let's have to see, no? That's not what the Rosh writes. Because if the parent just says, be machal Shabbos, the parent says, be metame yourself, that's not, ready? That's not the type of kibbud av v'em that you would think could override an Issa D'Oraisa. That's what the Rosh writes. Not that it's not kibbud av v'em. That's not the type of kibbud av v'em that you would think you can apply in Esrei Dochalos Haseh. If the parent is in need of food, there's a havamin of B'chias Yisurim. But if the parent just simply says, go be metame yourself, that is not the type of kibbud av v'em that would override Tumas Kohanim. One type of kibbud av v'em, I would think it overrides, and I need the pasuk. Achesh Shavsosei Tishmaru. The other type of kibbud av v'em, although it is kibbud av v'em, there's no way in the world that can override what is forbidden in Torah. That's what the Vilna Gaon is about. Siman Reish Mem, Hilchos kibbud av v'em. That's the Chazon Ish, Kuf Mem Tes Ches. What are these two tiers of kibbud av v'em? That there's one type of kibbud av v'em where if I didn't have a pasuk, I would say it overrides Yisurim. And there's another type of kibbud av v'em where, despite the fact that it's kibbud av v'em, but it's clear that there's no override. There's no override. That's what the Chazon Ish writes. That, you know what, Avodas Hashem is the Torah Mitzvot, but there's something beyond the Torah Mitzvot. That's called Ratzon HaTorah. When the Gemara Kedushin, Daf Lamed Aleph Beis, asks you, what is the technical parameter of Kavod es avicha v'esimecha? You know what? That is limited. That is limited. That is those fixed examples that the Gemara gives me. Machil, mashke, and the like. And what about this tier 2? That's the Chazon Ish's Ratzon HaTorah. Ratzon HaTorah. Aside from the technical mitzvah of kibbud av v'em. But you know what? You have to fulfill the Ratzon Hashem. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is desirous of your being very respectful to your parents. Even though it is not technically part a mitzvah. You know, Rashi is bothered. I'll just give you an example, no? The juxtaposition of the death of Terach and Lech Lecha Me'artzecha. You know? Rashi comments that Avram Avinu left, and he left his father, you know, alone. Doesn't Rashi write that Yaakov Avinu was punished for so many years that he didn't communicate with Yitzchak? I'll ask you a question. You learned the Gemara, no? A Ben Noach, the Avos, were not obligated in Kibbut Av V'Ein, no? Dama Ben Sina, you saw that Gemara? No? Doesn't the Gemara refer to him as Eino Tziviosa? No? Not obligated. You mean Avram Avinu, there was a question at Kibbut Av V'Ein? Yaakov Avinu is punished because based on his madrega should have lived. There wasn't a mitzvah of Kibbut Av V'Ein. There wasn't a mitzvah of Kibbut Av V'Ein. So you know what I'm telling you? This Chazon Ish, you're right. There's a mitzvah of Kibbut Av V'Ein, but aside from the mitzvah of Kibbut Av V'Ein, there's certain expectations that the Torah has. There's certain things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires. There's certain behavior that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not desire, regardless of whether it's a mitzvah counted in Torah Giants. Wow, that's the concept of a Ratzon HaTorah. Why was Sodom destroyed? Yesterday's Kriyas HaTorah? You know, it's a pasuk in Yechezkel, Tezayin. Yad ani ve'evyon no hechzik. They didn't practice tzedakah. They didn't uphold the needy. You know, the Ram brings the raya from that a Benoach is chayiv in tzedakah. But it's mafurish in the Rambam. That's not true. The Ram halachos malachim, Perak Yud halach Yud, a goy is not chayiv in tzedakah. Stone was not chayiv in tzedakah. And stone was destroyed because they failed to give tzedakah. Yad ani ve'evyon no hechzika. You know what the Ramban writes? You know what Ben Bachai writes? What's wrong with a society that outlaws tzedakah? You're caught, they're caught, helping somebody else, giving tzedakah. You know what? You're put to death. It's a capital crime. But the only thing that's wrong with that society is there's a mitzvah of tzedakah. And the society is not allowing you to perform a mitzvah. Really. Now that's the chiddush, the Ramban Rabbeinu Bachaya, that society is so decadent that it has no right to exist, irrespective of any mitzvah tzedakah. You don't have to be obligated in tzedakah to know that this is what is appropriate. And if you outlaw that which is appropriate, it's not that you're just guilty of a bittul mitzvah saseh, but this is not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu envisioned. Of Avodas Hashem. That's the Chazon Ish's Ratzon HaTorah. Wow, so Sodom was destroyed. The Ramban writes the same thing is true when it comes to the Ramabel. They were destroyed because of Gezel, not because of the Isser of Gezel, because of the expectation. Ooh, that's Ramban. Well, Reishis Perek, Vav Pasuk Yud Gimel. Wow. Eino tzarich nazi lahazir. You don't need a Navi to tell you that you're not allowed to steal. That's something that Kadosh Baruch Hu expects. There are expectations in the Torah, even if something technically is not a mitzvah. Is there a difference between an absolute mitzvah and what the Chazon Ish calls Ratzon HaTorah? Yeah, that's that Rash V'Nivamas Navod, D'chiyas Yisurim. In order to think Esed or Chalos Hasei, you have to have an overt and explicit mitzvah Hasei. The Ratzon HaTorah can't push aside alav, but maybe a mitzvah can. And that's why, for the mitzvah of Kibbut Av V'Ein, you require a pasuk. For the expectation of Kibbut Av V'Ein, Rashba writes that you don't require any pasuk, any drush. All right, that's something that's incredible, no? The Ratzon Hashem. I'll tell you where this is fine. Yeah.
Would following the mitzvah of Torah but not the Ratzon be considered another bush of Torah?
I will tell you that one has to, it's a very, very good question. Like that which the Ramban writes of Kadoshim to you, a novel Rishus HaTorah, I will tell you there are different gradations. Some of the examples of novel Rishus HaTorah might sound like technically it's mutter. But nonetheless, right, there's a degree of what I would call the Ratzon HaTorah. Sometimes it's more than that. In other words, if a person, for example, is abusing an animal, I wouldn't say to him, Navo B'Reshus HaTorah. I would say, you're Navo Shelo B'Reshus HaTorah. I would say, Bava Metzia Lamed Beis. That's Tzar B'Lechaim Daraisa. So I think no doubt that even within the realm of, right, Ratzon HaTorah, that there are different degrees. You know, a person who abuses an animal, it's not the same as a person, let's say, that picks up a big piece of meat and puts it in his mouth. Right? That, the Ramban writes, is Navo B'Reshus HaTorah. You're eating in a gluttonous way. But a person who abuses, how do you know what's what? That's why you need like these makoros. In other words, that Tzar B'Lechaim is Daraisa, because the Rambam writes it's explicit in the Torah that Bilam is criticized for hitting an animal. That criticism is not a Navo B'Reshus HaTorah. Or you see from the mitzvah of Prika, or you see from Nisra Chasima, the more explicit the Torah is, even if it's not written as an absolute mitzvah, that's something which is compelling. But all that's included in this broadest concept of a Ratzon HaTorah. There's so many examples. I'll tell you a stunning targum. This I want you to see as well. Yirmiyahu Perkites. There, Yirmiyahu Navi sees that Bnei Yisrael are engaged in horrific acts. Avodah Zarah and everything that the Torah considers to be inappropriate. So Yirmiyahu, the Navi, gives significant musar to Klal Yisrael. That which you're doing, the Navi says, lo tzivisi, lo dibarti, lo osa alibi. That's his musar. What does that mean? So I'll just say, take a look at Targum. Lo tzivisi ba'oraisa. Ba'oraisa. The Navi says to Klal Yisrael, is there a pasuk in the Chumash? Is there a mitzvah that says this is what you should do? That which you're doing is not conforming to the mitzvah Torah. Lo tzivisi. You're not following the tzivuy Hashem. Lo dibarti. You know what Targum says? Dibur is a Navi. Was there a Navi that told you that this is how you should serve Hashem? That which you're doing is wholly inappropriate. It's against the tzivui of the Torah. It's against the dibur of the Navi. Lo tzivisi, lo dibarti. And now, phrase 3. Lo osa alibi. You know what Targum writes? Lo rava kadamai. This is not what Hashem desires of you. This is not what Hashem wants. Whoa. There's a tzivui, there's a dibur, and there's the Ratzon Hashem. There's the Ratzon Hashem. Avodas Hashem begins with the Torah Mitzvot. But beyond the Torah Mitzvot, you better see to it that you take the time. What is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires of me? That's binding. That's not a midas chasidus. That's tzar b'alechaim daris. So I once wrote just simply the following. When you're interested in the mitzvos HaTorah, Taryag mitzvos, that's exactly what the Rambam writes. What is the mitzvah? You have the following question. The mitzvah, the Isser of Girarasha, does that apply to a behemoth tamei? You want to know whether the bris milah of a yotzei dofen is done on day 8 or day 1. Okay. You want to know whether the mitzvah of avelus is day 1, day 8. You know what? That's where the Rambam writes, Ein lemeidim mikodem Matan Torah. The mitzvahs HaTorah, the Taryag mitzvahs. That is Taryag mitzvahs ner Moshe Sinai. Okay. But what about this category of the Ratzon HaTorah? The Ratzon HaTorah, which is binding min HaTorah. But that you can't glean from Sefer Bereshis. That's irrelevant. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu praises Avram Avinu, Vayashkem Avram Aboker, that's irrelevant for our avodas Hashem? Isn't it obvious that that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his desire is of? And therefore the Gemara can derive its reason in the mitzvahs. And that is Tosfos writes, That could be a din daraisa. A din daraisa, not a mitzvah daraisa, but a hagdara, a din daraisa, because obviously this is part of the Ratzon Hashem. If true, it's Shiras Hayam, but if incorporating the Torah Hashem is the Shira B'nai Yisrael, and part of that is Zeh Keil Aveyu, Hisnal Lefana B'mitzvos. You know what that means? That Hidr Mitzvah is a din daraisa. It's not going to be found in Taryag Mitzvahs as a mitzvah daraisa, but it's a din daraisa. If I have a suffix in Hidr Mitzvah, I'm going to paskin Sfeika daraisa l'chumra for Hidr Mitzvah. Because Hidr Mitzvah is a din daraisa, like Tzar Balei Chaim is a din daraisa. If Yaakov Avinu was told, I want you to celebrate every bracha, every simcha to the fullest. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him. That's only relevant for Yaakov Avinu, and that doesn't affect our avodas Hashem. If Yehuda is redeemed because he takes responsibility for Binyamin, so you can walk away and say, that's true of Yehuda, but that has nothing to do with my avodas Hashem. Really. That's not the Ratzon Hashem. I would tell you when it comes to the Ratzon HaTorah, that's the purpose of Sefer Bereshis. Not mitzvahs, expectations, how it is that you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is not just Midas Hasidus. This is Tzar Balei Chaim Daraisa. You know, it's necessary, obviously, to be so incredibly meticulous about the mitzvahs HaTorah. But just because someone may tell you, you know, technically speaking, you're exempt from, or technically speaking, this is not within, that doesn't mean that it's value neutral. You have to take a step back and ask yourself, you know, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu desire? And if it's clear, that's a din daraisa. That's a din daraisa. And the Rebbe is going to pass in Safek L'chumra. Right, in those cases. That I think is something that is probably one of the most incredible yisodos of Avodas Hashem. You know, Rav Bartzenur writes that why is it that Pirkei Avos begins with Moshe Kibot Torah Sinai? I would have thought that Sefer or Maseches Berachos should begin with, well, Moshe Kibot Torah Sinai. You're beginning Shas, so why not just tell me the Shosholos HaMazorah? So you know what the Rav writes? Take a look at the Mishnayos. Because it's obvious to us that Maseches Brachos, Kriya Shema, and Maseches Shabbos, and Maseches Erev, and well, of course, is Halacha, which is Moshe Kibot Torah Sinai. Pirkei Avos. Milei Da'avos are norms and ethics, morals, etiquette. You know, maybe that's conventional. Every society has their norms and their ethics. Is that really informed by our Masorah? That's what the Rav writes, is the reason that Rebbe waited until Pirkei Avos to tell you the Shosholos HaMasorah. What is obvious to us in terms of the Shabbos or Kashrus is also self-evident when it comes to everything that's included in Pirkei Avos. I will tell you the binding power of Pirkei Avos is not the Mitzvah HaTorah, it's the Ratzon HaTorah, the Ratzon Hashem. And for that, everything that the Avos and Imos did speaks volumes. Take a look at the introduction of the Ramban to Sefer Shmos. Whatever happened with Avos is a Yitzir the Zara. It's a creation. It's a creation. So it's not surprising that there can be different tiers when it comes to Kibbut Avayim. The Rosh Yeshiva and Avot, a technical mitzvah, but also an expectation. And that's what I would urge you to do. To devote yourself to the mitzvah Torah, of course. But beyond the Torah mitzvahs, the expectations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has of all of us. What it means to be an Eved Hashem. What it means to be the Zera Avram. For that, you certainly glean from the lives of Avos and Imos. You learn Sefer Bereshis, and then you have to take a step back, the takeaway. How can that inform, how can that enrich my Avodas Hashem? And here, don't tell me, in the Meidei Kodem Matan Torah, which is true of a mitzvah mugderes, a mitzvah ktsuva, is not true of Ratzon Hashem. So Be'ezras Hashem, you should have that siyata d'shmaya. To be able to grow in your learning, take it as seriously as you can. Let it become absolutely part of you. You have to chazer incessantly. No? Time and time again. The Gemara Menachos writes in Tzadi Tes, you're not allowed to forget your learning. Hear that? You're not allowed to forget. That's a pasuk. I'm not allowed to forget. What exactly does that mean? You know what it means? You have to review time and time again. Time and time again. Everything that you're learning. And you position yourself. And you daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for siyata d'shmaya. So Be'ezras Hashem, through your amelus, your hasmada, your hishtadlus, and your koach hatfilah, you should be zoche to significant brachas. To be able to grow in the tzivui, in the dibur, and in the ratzon.